All right, welcome back, folks. Hopefully, you've been enjoying the semester so far. We're working our way through the sections, the chapters, the material, and we're about ready to roll up on the economy and work. You might ask yourself, well, why study the economy? Well, because you're part of it. An economy deals not only with money, but it also deals with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services within a society. Um, of course, this production and consumption process is a major link between individuals that exist at the micro level and society that exists at the macro level. Um, you want to take in when you think about the economy, you're really wanting to understand the historical and economic changes. In the United States, the economy has changed over time. New technologies have changed the nature of work. If we reflect back on our history, we find that the earliest American economy, or the pre-16th century Native American societies, were either mobile, i.e., hunters and gatherers, or horticultural societies, which were based on the domestication of animals, farming, and generating a surplus of resources. So, this history conditions the arrival of Northern Europeans and their new ideas on what economy should be, and it of course created some conflict with those populations. Um, uh, in reference to the agricultural revolution, this of course is a period which included social and economic changes, population increases, and ultimately increased efficiency of food production. The population increases followed from the domestication of plants and animals and the gradually increasing efficiency of food production. So, as technology makes food production more efficient, we have more of a surplus of food, and the population marries up to this new amount of food that societies now have. Better farming and ranching techniques, of course, allowed larger groups to thrive and remain in one location for periods of time, which ultimately lays the foundation for private property. So in the United States, the agricultural economy, it ultimately encouraged a stratified labor force. The southern agricultural economy depended on slave labor to grow cotton and tobacco. And that, of course, is the foundation for a slave trade and the ownership of human beings, which ultimately serves as one of the driving forces of the Civil War. The Industrial Revolution. This is a much different process from what we see now. The Industrial Revolution rapidly transformed social life through technological and economic developments, including the assembly line, steam power, and urbanization. What we found with the shift to a manufacturing economy was a shift from the agricultural way of life to the city way of life. The next revolution that we have to really consider ourselves um, embarking upon is the information revolution. And this, of course, refers to the recent social revolution made possible by the development of the microchip in the 1970s. This brings on vast improvements of the ability to manage information. We go from a society that really doesn't have a whole lot of information and what information was out there wasn't disseminated in an effective way. Most of the population probably didn't know what was going on outside of their local spaces, and that, of course, has changed significantly today with the advent of the new news and 24-hour news cycles and the internet and smartphones. Um, Next thing we want to talk about is the world economic system, or a world economic system. The one that we are a part of is capitalism, of course. This is an economic system based on the laws of the free market, competition, privatization of the means of production, and the production for a profit. Uh, there's an emphasis put on supply and demand, and that supply and demand is magically met with the free market. It encourages efficiency. It encourages new technologies. It encourages the expansive markets, and ultimately, it encourages cost cutting. So the pursuit of profits, of course, drives the capitalist system. Many critics of capitalism argue that this systematic privilege that goes to certain groups while disadvantaging others is a huge problem, and it creates conflict. For instance, in order to maximize profits at a business, one strategy is lowering employee wages. Therefore, the business owners or the stockholders earn more while workers struggle to get by. You can imagine how this creates conflict. It creates a tension between those who own the means of production and those who do not. This is a set of concepts that Karl Marx made famous in his discussions on capitalism, and how the structure of the system was destined to create conflict. Another set of ideas are socialism and communism. We tend to think of these in the same light, but I think that does a great disservice to socialism. Socialism is an economic system based on the collective ownership of the means of production, collective distribution of goods and services, and government regulation of the economy. Socialism tends to encourage this greater distribution of wealth amongst people than capitalism does, under the idea that distributing wealth is beneficial for all of society. It reduces, but it does not eliminate class divisions. We find class divisions in almost any social form of organization, especially once we get a lot of people brought together. And critics argue that regulating profit or income discourages free market competition, and therefore economies, especially economies of scale, stagnate. Communism, on the other hand, is a system of government that eliminates private property and is the most extreme form of socialism, because all citizens work for the government and there are no class distinctions. I like to think of this as Marx's ideal, but in order for us to get there, we were going to have to evolve as a social unit as well. Some critics argue that communism discourages specialized professions and stymies creativity. For instance, why would a person want to become a brain surgeon if the reward for doing so is no different from becoming a janitor? Others, however, argue that all occupations serve different yet valuable services to a society, and just the need for brain surgeons would drive somebody to do that as a living. We also have to remember that all nations' economies have both capitalist and socialist aspects to them. A good example of this is the United States and how they have some socialist economic features, including business subsidies, market regulations, and public aid programs. So there is a social side of the economy. It seems right now we aren't hearing all that much from it, but in reference to the ideal type, the United States actually possesses characteristics of both capitalism and socialism. So, what is the nature of work? Well, before the Industrial Revolution, economic production took place in the household. Whatever the exertion of energy and the byproduct of that exertion, whether it was growing products like corn or squash or other things that you might have in your garden, or it was tending the cattle or the livestock or hunting and gathering. The nature of work was to benefit the household itself. But that changes with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and the birth of the factory led to the workplace being in the public sphere. And the families were no longer capturing the fruits of one's labor. They were actually having to go out into the marketplace and sell their labor, which allowed the owners of the means of production to capture a significant amount of an individual's labor. This was very different from what was going on before this. Marx, of course, was very interested in the fruits of one's labor. He argued that when people lose control over their production and the conditions of production, they become alienated and view work as a means to survive rather than a rewarding activity. So, according to Marx, workers were alienated from their labor in four important ways. First, from the product of their labor. Essentially, the product of a worker's labor becomes the property of the capitalist, and they're allowed to do with that labor as they see fit. Second, from their own productive activity. Workers in a capitalist society are alienated from the process of work and therefore their own productive activity. Third, from their fellow workers. The worker is alienated from other people, the alienation of man from man, as Marx calls it. Capitalism forces individuals into competition with each other, therefore alienating us from our fellow workers. And finally, from the human nature itself. Workers are alienated, at least Marx believed, because that work should not be an unhappy burden taken upon only as a need to preserve physical existence. Instead, he assumes that it is in our nature to seek out work that is vital and productive for our own lives. The essence of what it means to be human is to engage in free, conscious activity, but capitalism degrades human labor to a mere means of survival.